Okay. Hi, everyone. Dr. Jen, I think I know most of you pretty well here. But if somebody I haven't met, I'm a member at LP. I'm also a naturopath. So GLP-1s are obviously a conversation that are front and center right now when it comes to health and fitness. I would say gaining more and more traction every day because of some of the positive side effects that are coming out of being on a GLP-1. So today I kind of want to just walk through um, exploring GLP-1s a little bit more and understanding whether or not they might align with the goals that you have for yourself and whether they're a good choice for you. I think they're really interesting therapy right now and really are aligning well with a lot of people are struggling with. So let's start here. Okay, so just really quickly, what GLP medications are for those of you that aren't totally familiar or how they work. Um, GLP medications are really, really beneficial or really helpful for people who have a lot of food noise in their life. So what they do, they help to reduce what people call food noise, which is like how often you're thinking about food, your appetite. They also slow how quickly food moves through your stomach, so it makes you feel full longer. And there's lots of research around it improving blood sugar targets. So ultimately, the people who are mostly using GLP-1s are those who are really struggling with their weight because food is very front and center in their mind all the time. And it's hard to make choices around caloric restriction when you are a person who is always thinking about food. Um, so that's really like the gist of what GLP-1s, what people notice when they're taking GLP-1 medications. So I was talking to somebody today, for example, who would normally eat two or three pieces of pizza on the weekend and was explaining how she put two pieces on her plate and only got through one. And I was like, actually, I'm happy with that. Or um, another example she gave was, usually by lunchtime, she's counting down the seconds till she can finish work so she can go and have her lunch. And now she hardly notices, like time will pass and it will be long past her lunchtime before she's like, oh, I guess it's time for me to eat. So GLP-1s are quite helpful for people who are really, really food centered, where food is a really, really important and conscious part of what you're thinking about all day. So, um, are you a candidate for using a GLP-1? In Canada, there's some pretty strict guidelines around prescription of GLP-1s. So there is a certain category of people who can be prescribed GLP-1. So if your BMI, which is a measure I hate, and I'll give you some other measures in the next slide of what you can think about. If your BMI is over 30, you qualify for using a GLP-1 medication. If your BMI is over 27 and you have other health concerns such as insulin resistance, diabetes, high cholesterol and triglycerides, high blood pressure, then you can also potentially qualify to be prescribed a GLP-1. If you do not fall into those categories right now in Canada, it's very difficult to even be prescribed a GLP-1. And I'm going to talk later more about, because I think most of us fall into the category of like in your 40s and 50s, gaining some maybe perimenopausal weight, but potentially not hitting these exact targets. Some of us are, some of us aren't. But that is another category that I think you'll see more and more people being prescribed GLP-1s in that group. So, if you have concerns with your weight, your appetite, or your metabolism, these are kind of the main concerns that people are coming in to consider a GLP-1. Often people have already built a foundation of nutrition and sleep and stress management and exercise, and none of those things are really working, especially in a population like the one at Limitless. I'm assuming everybody is hitting their targets or more or less for weight training and, trying to follow a healthy diet. Most of the patients that I see from LP are extremely frustrated based on that because these are all the things that we know to do to help us with our body composition. And yet often there are co-conditions like perimenopause that are starting to make it really difficult to hit these goals. So this kind of gives you a sense of who is taking these medications and whether you're a candidate. I actually think the group of people who are already exercising, already hitting their protein targets, or at least doing their darndest to get all that protein in, are a great pool of people to consider something like a GLP-1 because it helps to reduce all the potential side effects that you would get if you weren't doing those things in advance of taking a medication like this. Just to mention, if anybody wants to jump in with questions along the way, I'm happy to answer as we go, or you can save them for the end. But because we're a small group today, feel free. I'm sure if you have a question, probably somebody else listening will as well. So please unmute yourself and jump in anytime.
Jen, I have a question about, and you might get to it, but w what does prescribed mean? And maybe you are prescribed something, but um, might not be able to get it, or it's expensive. Do you talk a little bit about that later? Or
So prescribed means that your doctor is willing to write you the script. Right now, you
right?
can only get these medications in Canada from your family doctor or your endocrinologist or whoever you're working with.
Hmm.
So prescribed, and then there's a different set of qualifications to be covered by for these drugs.
Insurance,
I believe that those, if I'm not mistaken, in Ontario, is your BMI has to be over 30.
30. Yes.
Yeah. So there
That's what
is
we've
this
seen. So even though someone could be prescribed from their doctor, health insurance still isn't
covering it for that
covering
group.
it.
BMI is over 27, but and has maybe some other health concerns, but they're not hitting that 30 BMI number.
So, okay. So
Which
basically, currently with this type of medication, the insurance companies are sort of making the health care call versus a doctor, if we
um
can say that.
the I think it's country by country.
In
I'm not
Canada, I
sure who is
guess.
actually making the call for like the fam the Ontario Medical Board is probably making the call of who can be prescribed GLP-1s, and then the insurance companies are making the call of who can have it paid for. Does that make sense?
Right, right, right. But the cost is so high. It's like not
Hmm.
many people would
Choose to
choose to.
use.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I see what. Yeah.
So this is another
Makes
conversation
sense.
that I will actually get to is some alternative ideas and strategies that are coming out that can help to lower maybe how much of these drugs you're taking and how much then therefore you have to pay in order to have an effective weight loss target um, hit by these medications. So I'll get into that a little bit, but some other measures that I want to bring to the attention of everyone that also reflect somebody who might benefit from a GLP-1. And as the targets hopefully move a little bit, you might qualify for this. But things to be aware of for yourself that these also put you in a category of risk that I think is important. So, first one is waist circumference. And they consider 35 above 35 inches waist circumference to be in a high risk zone. These I think are especially important because specifically of that perimenopausal window where you may not be, you may not have a really high BMI because the rest of your body might still be looking reasonably fit, but you're putting on all that extra abdominal weight. So there's good things to know, your waist circumference, your waist to height ratio. So this is a really simple measure, and it's basically waist circumference divided by height. And if it's less than zero point 0.5, they consider you lower risk. And if it's greater than zero point 0.5, you're at an increased risk of cardiometabolic issues. And then there's body fat percentage, which most of us have from being at the gym. And I would say around that above 32%. 33% is where you hit the obesity range. Michelle, do you have a number that you use? 32 or 33? Yeah, somewhere in
Yeah,
that.
the same ones that you have there.
Yeah, okay. Perfect. So these are also important to know because I think these are if you qualify in any one of these areas, this is where it makes sense to start thinking about whether or not you need extra support from something like a medication. So who benefits most? I would say strong candidates are obviously people who are obese and have weight-related health conditions. Prediabetes or insulin resistance. So this is where we get into like understanding your actual physiology and whether or not you have challenges beyond just some extra weight. So I'm often doing insulin testing for patients and looking at your sugar numbers, your cholesterol numbers, all those kind of things to understand. And people are very different. I see a lot of people who look exactly the same. Maybe they're in that kind of 40, 50 range and they have extra abdominal weight that they're putting on and frustrated about. But some of them have a lot of insulin resistance, some have none, and everything in between. So um, the more of those kind of risk factors that you have, the more it makes sense to think about, if this layer of care might work for you. Significant food cravings. So if you have no problem staying on a 1,200 calorie a day diet, and that's really not what's going on behind the scenes for you, is that you struggle with food intake, the GLP-1 category is maybe not going to do a lot for you. You don't really want to be dipping much lower than that type of a calorie intake. I mean, a certain amount of calorie restriction is good, but especially when you get into like the perimenopausal conversation, which I think most of us on this call are kind of in that zone. Um, the the benefit of losing those 10 or 15 or 20 frustrating pounds compared to the risk of losing some muscle mass, bone density, uh, is probably not in your best interest, unless food cravings are really the problem. But if you're able to follow a really low calorie strict diet and that's not what's going on, then we would dive deeper into some different hormonal blood work, for example, and other factors to see if balancing that out would make the biggest difference. And then like the repeated cycle of weight loss and gain, especially when that's food related, like you can lose the weight, for 8 weeks, but you can never really keep it off. And you just pop back up to the original weight. That's definitely something I feel like is current in my life. Gain and lose the same 5 pounds for multiple times over and over. So those types of people would be strong candidates, if that's common for you. And then really emerging candidates, women in perimenopause is becoming just a huge topic in general in the world. We're learning so much more about this. It's, in every conversation now, including the one about GLP-1s. Um, People with inflammatory symptoms. So we're now seeing that GLP-1s have a pretty significant impact on inflammation. And also people with increased appetite despite healthy habits. So no matter what you do, no matter how balanced your blood sugar gets, you still are, your desire to eat is much higher than what your calories should be in a day. Okay, so some of the benefits of GLP-1, I'm a naturopath, so generally I'm on the side of less medication is better. But some of the major benefits that are coming out beyond weight loss, there's like the physical parts of it. So they are seeing reduced inflammation, improved cholesterol, blood pressure, blood sugar, reduced appetite if that's an issue. Lifestyle benefits like easier portion control, better confidence, less mental energy spent thinking about food and having to regulate that part. And then, some of the psychological benefits like reduce guilt around food and eating and having a better relationship with food overall. And they're starting to research more cardiovascular, brain health, and mental health. They're starting to find benefits in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's. So if you're in a category where you're at a high risk for something like that, some long-term metabolic outcomes, and then also combinations therapies. So they're really looking at what happens if you're taking hormone replacement plus GLP-1 and how these different things combine. Um, so there'll be lots of research coming out soon in that area, I think. Some of the downsides, there's digestive is like the main side effect. So you're getting maybe nausea and diarrhea, constipation, headaches, some of those kind of side effects. The cost challenge. So if your insurance won't cover it, it is approximately, I believe, at the lowest dose around $700 a month. And you can work with your pharmacist or other people to try to reduce that a bit. But it is, even with that, not a cheap drug to take. And then there's the long-term commitment that is usually required, which I'll get into a little bit. GLP-1s are not very easy to come off of, and all of the research, all of the benefits are while you are on the drug. There isn't a lot of research about taking it for short-term weight loss. So, if you are in perimenopause and you just want to get rid of those 10 or 20 pounds that you're really frustrated with, there isn't a lot of research around what happens after. I have some suggestions and some things that are starting to come out of how you might use this if you wanted to use it in a more short-term basis. But there is quite a rebound effect with appetite when you come off of these drugs. So there is definitely, like any other drug or diet, return to original weight and beyond if you do not come off of these correctly. So most people are considered to be on it for life. So suddenly it becomes a fairly significant financial um, battle if you want to. And most people are not that keen on being on something for life, especially once they've hit their goal weight, unless they are struggling with extreme obesity. So most of the people, I would imagine, that are in a reasonably fit category and just want to lose, 20 to 30 pounds, it's a bit frustrating to feel like it's hard to come off of this drug. And then there's some less common risks, as there are with every drug, pancreatitis and gallbladder issues and things like that, which I don't think are as significant. They're quite a bit less. And then there's the risks of the way that GLP-1s work is that they essentially reduce desire, desire for everything, desire for food, desire for gambling, desire for alcohol, desire for all of those things that give you those dopamine hits. You just aren't really wanting those things anymore. Desire for sex, desire for anything that gives you that feeling. So there is inconsistent research on the actual outcomes of this, but it is important to know that taking something like a GLP-1 can be really hard on people because they no longer get the pleasure that they were getting out of some of the things that they, healthy or not, that they enjoyed doing. So if you think about eating being a really pleasurable experience, taking a GLP-1 kind of takes the pleasure and the desire out of that. And so, if that is a big part of your life, and food is a source of pleasure, for example, or anything, it really works for like all the categories of desire. Um, that is a definitely a downside that I like to bring to people's attention when we're thinking about whether or not a GLP-1 is actually a good choice. The effects on sex are interesting because it's mostly women taking GLP-1s, and as women's bodies get closer to a state that they feel attractive in, then desire goes up because, of course, women's desire is not only physiological, it's also really mental. So there's kind of mixed research on whether or not it wrecks your sex drive. However, I think that's an important piece to consider, especially if you're in your 40s and 50s and you're already kind of hitting a different hormonal stage of life, something to really pay attention to if you did find yourself on one of these drugs, that it's, not taking away some things that you want. Okay, so once you're at the point where you're going to take a GLP-1, there are some really important pieces to maintain your muscle mass. especially in certain categories of people, like perimenopausal women, but everyone. So really hitting your protein targets. And I usually say first thing you do is eat your protein at your meals. You know what? This applies for anybody, even if you don't have a great appetite, and you struggle to eat large portions of food in general. Um, Eating protein first helps to make sure that at least you're getting that component in, and then maybe your veggies and then your carbs at the end. Strength training, minimum 5 days a week, I would say, is important to maintain your muscle mass. A mix of doesn't have to be weights, but like exercising to build muscle 5 days a week. Tracking your success and measuring not just body composition, but making sure that you really know what your goals are. So what if it's maintaining muscle mass, making sure that you're actually tracking these things along the way, monitoring your strength, doing like the LP testing, things that help you understand what you're gaining and what you're losing along the way so you can make good decisions. And then there's supplementation. So looking at your nutrients, which ones are most likely to be depleted, muscle health, things like creatine become quite essential in this. So, and I would say that's the number one thing to focus on if you were to, try something like a GLP-1 is keeping that muscle mass high. Okay, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about perimenopause and weight gain, because I would say this is the primary category of people that are asking me questions right now about GLP-1s. Weight gain happens during perimenopause for a bunch of different reasons. You can get some reduced insulin sensitivity, sometimes sleep is disrupted. You can have an increase in hunger and a reduction in how satiated you feel when you eat. Fat gets redistributed towards the abdomen, woohoo. And many women like gain weight despite exercising and eating well. And so GLP-1s are not always for perimenopause. I often look at trying to replace hormones first in this group because that often is effective as well in body composition um, maintenance above something like a GLP-1 because of the risks of muscle loss and bone loss in this specific group. But again, if food really feels like the primary concern, and if you have a lot of metabolic health markers like insulin resistance, a GLP-1 can be really helpful. Um, the thing that I would say in this group that I think is really interesting and important is that a lot of people are now talking about microdosing these peptides as opposed to taking them in their full dose. So the starting dose of many of these drugs is an eighth of what you might end up on at the end if you're working up to the full dose of a GLP-1. Now, they are trying to hit certain targets of weight loss that is above and beyond what you would get from diet or exercise. But in specifically in perimenopause, if you have that extra weight that you're looking to get rid of, and you are not successful in doing it any other way, um, looking at starting on the very lowest dose of a GLP-1 for a window of time, and then even reducing it by half so that you're microdosing basically GLP-1s. You can see a rate of weight loss often around like the 5 pounds a month mark instead of the 10 to 15 pounds a month that you're seeing at a full dose. You can avoid a lot of the side effects, and if you're willing to be a bit more patient with it, I think this is going to be a very popular way of taking these medications in the future. So, what I like about something like a smaller dose of a GLP-1 is that it's cheaper. It has less side effects. You can generally see less muscle mass loss. Um, and for the most part, it can take, 4 to 6 months maybe to lose the extra 20-ish pounds that you potentially have put on. But in a less intensive way, in a way that your body might normally gain weight, and then with less side effects if you did want to try to come off of it. And if you didn't, even going lower, like lower and lower into the microdose category, so you're just maintaining that small benefit that you were getting rather than being on a full dose. Because I'm sure you've all seen also what happens to people over time when they're on a full dose of GLP-1, which is that they just continue to lose weight. So, which we definitely do not want in perimenopause. I think in perimenopause, the goal is to be strong and healthy, to have great muscle mass and still have, some body fat, but not, like the goal is not to be under the 18% body fat category for perimenopause because you can predict osteoporosis, for example, as a ratio um, of age to body weight. So the skinnier you are and the older you are, the more likely you are to get osteoporosis. A little bit of weight helps put more weight on your bones, and helps to keep your bones the way that you want them to be. So I think in this group, there's a special category that will be, explored a lot more, which is that smaller dose of a GLP-1 to just help you keep that perimenopausal weight at bay.
Jen, that's super interesting from a pharmaceutical perspective. It's like, okay, why didn't we just originally start with this microdose? I know originally it was for, you know, diabetes, obesity, and they're starting with this much higher dose that
Mhm.
someone has to stay on it so that they don't yo-yo,
Right,
which in real life, if you do your diet like that, you're going to get the same results. And then if you
right.
do it correctly, you know,
Yeah.
uh, you're not yo-yoing and you're keeping that weight off.
Hmm.
But they want they want people to just continue to use the drug and buy it.
In the
So
highest
they're
dose possible.
starting, yeah,
Hmm. Hmm. And really, like the original GLP-1
right.
is
And
for
that's what I'm thinking
obesity,
of.
like
Yeah.
big, difficult obesity, which is a huge problem in the world. But now, of course, it's extending down categories into like, what about for this? What about for this? And so I
Hmm.
think we will see this idea of like a smaller micro dose
Different dosage.
being really helpful in a lot of different conditions where people don't want. But I mean, I think
Right.
pharmaceutically, they don't like that either.
Right.
Because
But they
the more
could expand their horizon versus,
yeah,
just
exactly, exactly. And
yeah.
I think it will come to that in the next little while, which is why this conversation is important. Like even if you don't
Hmm.
qualify right at this moment for a GLP-1, it could be something in the future that is relevant. And in your 40s and 50s and 60s is when a lot of damage is done when it comes to insulin resistance and and inflammation and some of the things that GLP-1s really are helping. So as well as other things. But if you're not having success with all the other things,
Hmm.
then
Hmm.
yeah, just yeah. This is about GLP-1, so I just want to,
Interesting.
I think probably everyone here already knows all the other great things you can do for
Yeah.
inflammation and weight loss. So yeah. So people who can successfully come off of GLP-1s, because I think this is also one of the biggest questions that I get is like, I would like to use a GLP-1, but I don't want to be on it forever. So the people who are more successful at stopping after a certain amount of weight loss, people have lost a relatively modest amount of weight. So, 20, 30, 40 pounds compared to 100 pounds is definitely easier to come off. People who have established strong nutrition and exercise habits during the time that they are on GLP-1s or who already had that before they went in and maintained it during the time that they're on a GLP-1. If you use these drugs to allow yourself to eat all the foods you shouldn't be eating, just in smaller quantities, when you come off of it, you are going to have significantly more food cravings for that type of food. Who have maintained high levels of physical activity, prioritize protein intake. I mean, these are all kind of obvious, I think, in this group, but and who have addressed underlying issues that might have also been contributing to this, like street sleep and stress and menopause and emotional eating. And, when you aren't dealing with that as front and center in your mind, it gives your brain a chance to actually maybe go a layer deeper and deal with some of the the issues around that. And then obviously tapering off gradually under medical supervision is important. So um, that's kind of an overview of how GLP-1s work. If you have some extra body weight and all your metabolic markers are normal, I think that is um, really worth a conversation before you start something like this, because you're not going to get the same benefits as somebody who is really struggling with diabetes, for example, or some other underlying condition. So it's a bit of a flow chart of decision making to decide if trying something like this is right for you. Um, but for those who do, can be really significant in some really big challenges that a lot of people face. So um, I'm going to pause there. Does anybody have any questions about any of that um, that we've covered? Is that pretty clear how they're being used right now, where they might be going, and like some of the options um, around taking these or not?
I think so.
Yeah.
I was wondering what you would talk about with the muscle loss and
Hmm.
kind of how that's related. That's one of the biggest things that I've kind of heard of. Um, so do you think if someone were to go on something like this and has a really good strength training routine that potentially they might not lose muscle mass, or is it pretty much guaranteed that you will? Like if you have all of the factors, say
Yeah.
your protein,
Yeah. This is a tough conversation because I would actually ask back to you, Michelle, like if you are working with someone and they lose 20 pounds, do you ever see somebody lose 20 pounds and none of it be muscle mass?
yeah, rarely. I
Rarely.
think
Yeah.
it's like a sliding scale of, yeah,
Yeah, so it's about how much when you lose
right.
weight, how much of it is going to be coming from your muscle component. So I think you can do everything you can to minimize that. I
Hmm.
think knowing your muscle mass before you start taking something like this is also important because if you're already teetering kind of on the edge of what we would consider to
Yeah.
be not enough muscle mass, maybe it's something you want to really focus on for a year or two before you start taking a medication like this and really building that. Or maybe you want to look at taking some hormones, including a little bit of testosterone, depending on where you're at, to, if you're perimenopausal, for example, to make sure that you're doing everything you can to have not have these multiple factors working
Hmm.
against you. So I do think it's a bit of a multifaceted thing, but if you're going to be losing 20 pounds, you're going to be losing some muscle mass for
Yeah.
sure. So
Yeah.
starting in a good spot is ideal. Um, and if not, making sure you're not losing too much by regular tracking. And if you are considering what you're going to do about that um, before
Hmm.
you start taking
Hmm.
something.
Great. Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hmm. Hmm. But maintaining muscle mass is maintaining muscle mass, like, and putting on muscle mass. It's the same whether you're on a drug like this or not, really. Like, it is protein intake, it is resistance training, creatine, your nutrients. Like, that's still the same interventions that you would be thinking about if you wanted to put on muscle. Mhm. Does anyone else have any questions about that or things you've heard that you're wondering if they're true or not about GLP-1s or be curious to hear where, what people are hearing and what they're thinking about in this group. Is anybody seeing stuff about microdosing coming out? I feel like I have just a feed filled with all these perimenopausal people in the US.
My
Um,
feed is currently pregnancy, so it's not GL,
yeah,
but maybe now it's listening, so I might get a few
totally.
No, I have my hairdresser microdoses. And so
Okay.
she was kind of explaining that to me. So that was one of the reasons I was actually interested in this workshop was just to hear a little bit more about what that would look like or sound like or feel like. Because
Yeah.
just an interest. Yeah, just I don't know that much about it, but her doctor had said that was a good choice for her. So
And was prescribed in Canada a microdose?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah. I don't know
Interesting.
if it's like above board or if it's just her and her doctor have worked out a little way to kind of because she said you control the dial, so you can control how much your
Hmm.
dose is. So she just
Yeah,
between her and
interesting.
her doctor, they've kind of come up with a microdose, whatever that amount is. She didn't tell me, but
Yeah. And I'd be curious, was she significantly overweight before starting?
she's kind of in that boat of she's had a lot of um yeah, sorry, there's just children around.
You don't have to answer that if you don't want.
No,
I'm just
yeah,
learning about.
she's one of those people who, much like myself, has kind of always struggled with just being overweight and it never really working. Kind of, like I have been up and down and up and down and up and down my whole life, and just as
Yeah.
the older I get, the less I want to do that roller coaster, the more I'd like to find something that's a little bit more stable and consistent. So she was kind of in that same boat. And
Cool.
then also had some other health related issues. So her doctor had just thought that
Yeah.
would be a good choice for her. But
Yeah. To be honest, I'm still learning about all the different Ontario regulations or loopholes or how different ways it's being prescribed or found in Ontario for something like a microdose. So that's cool to hear. Thank you. That's interesting. It's definitely an area I need to spend some more time with my MD friends asking them about how they're using this because I think it is a great solution for somebody who's not struggling with, severe obesity, but who is in a category where a little bit of weight stability would really benefit them. So cool. Um,
I do have one question. This might be a bit of a naive. I kind of came in late, but
yeah.
you mentioned a lot like when I first came in about the like hormone markers and all of those pieces.
Mhm.
Like how do I get that tested? Like is that something I just go through my doctor to do, or is that something I have to go somewhere else for?
Yeah, so two options for blood work. So I'm a naturopath. I do blood work through Life Labs, but it's a paid service. So you can have really anything you want tested, and pay for it within, a couple $100. Like it's not super cost prohibitive. There's lots of testing you can do that isn't overly expensive. Or you can go to your family doctor and ask them to do testing. There are some that I find generally hard to get doctors to prescribe, like hormone testing is one of them that many doctors are resistant to giving requisitions for that. Insulin glucose charting, sometimes those are really hard to get. So two different options that way. And often it's a combination of like I'll work with somebody and I'll tell them all the tests I think they should know about themselves, and then they'll go to their family doctor with the list, and their doctor will give them some of them, and then we'll write a requisition for the rest.
What do you know why doctors are hesitant to prescribe those tests? Like what is it?
So for hormonal blood work, doctors are hesitant because you're getting 1 day out of a cycle. Less for men, like testosterone for men is tested more often, but for women, you really have to know, and the reference ranges are really big. So you have to be able to discern valuable information from testing in order for it to be valuable. And most medical doctors don't feel they can get enough valuable information out of a hormone panel, especially if you're not right in that menopausal zone and they're just testing if you're menopausal or not, or if you're a fertility patient. So I don't agree. I get really valuable information out of the hormone testing that I see. But yeah, that is the reasoning that many medical doctors won't do it. And then, yeah, and then I guess for like insulin glucose testing, they'll just do a fasting blood sugar and a hemoglobin A1C, like your 3 month marker, for example, of your blood glucose. I will often do the test where you have to go and drink the sugar drink and then track your insulin and your glucose over 2 hours. And it is absolutely amazing how many patients come back with normal hemoglobin A1C and fasting glucose, and they're definitely showing insulin resistance. Like when they have sugar, their body does not do what it's supposed to with that, but you can't really see that in some of those simpler testing. But most medical doctors won't do that unless you have diabetic markers. And at that point, it's kind of much harder and too late to intervene. So,
Yeah, it's so interesting, Jen. I find like when some people talk about their blood work in and around the gym, their family doctors do like the basic ones,
mhm.
and then think that that's the end user thinks like, okay, that's, the final marker. And then you go and you do all of these other blood tests, and then we find, oh no, actually, this is actually what's happening. It's so interesting that they don't just do the not the right
Yeah,
ones, but like let's get all the details.
it
And
does. Yeah. I mean, it's more cost on a system to test more things up front, but it's significantly less cost on a system to catch
right,
diabetes before it develops, or to know whether or not your problem is inflammation or cortisol or hormones or insulin resistance. Like these are very set different problems.
right,
And
right.
yeah, I think the deep dive is helpful.
Yeah, we have doctors making um, hormonal statements based on one day of someone's cycle. Well, that's not how, women work. So it's interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry, tangent.
Um, Okay. Well, anybody else have any questions or thoughts? I tried to keep this reasonably simple so that, I mean, if you want to talk any more about this, if you're wondering and want to really talk it through whether you specifically are a candidate or if this would be a good idea for you, I'm happy to set up an appointment and we can go through it in much more detail. But this is just kind of a high level understanding of whether, first of all, you are a candidate or not, and whether a deeper discussion is relevant to your health. So,
Or I would say, Jen, um, just as also if someone is thinking about this, you can also test some of the other things to make sure this is the right path versus are there
totally.
other areas that we can focus on as well?
Yeah,
Yeah,
100%. It's always good to work with somebody to make sure that all the baseline. I mean, it's no different than anything else. Like if I always say with something like ADHD, it's not that I don't think that it's wrong to take medication for ADHD. I think it's important to take medication for ADHD. But if you haven't corrected the sleep and the food and all the other underlying things, you're just going to end up having to take more. So it's all like that, right? If you know yourself really well and you know all the pieces, then you can make the right decisions. And if a medication is part of that, that's great. But we're always going for the less amount to have the most effective outcome. So, um, and it's just really important to know your blood work and where you're at before you start anything like this, so you know what you're working with and what's changing. So,
thanks, Jen.
yeah, no problem.
I'll go ahead and if you missed part of this recording, I will record it and send it out to everyone so that we have it and include Jen's information on that as well if you want to have a chat with her um, about any of this.
Okay, cool. Okay, bye everyone. Have a great evening. Hopefully, I'll see you all at